We need better coverage of mental health in video games, and today in this video I'm going to show you why, what we have so far, and how actual studies are wrong about mental health is covered within this art form. Don't get me wrong, I understand it. This is a video game. It's a bunch of pixels flying around a screen, a very clever screenplay that we actively participate in, or a fantasy that we'll never get to live out. It's really hard to take it seriously when we're fighting killer cacti or roaming around the city as a cat. But lately, I found myself down this rabbit hole. I've been playing a lot of dark, depressing, hard to stomach games that deal with mental illness and mental health as two sides of the same coin, and I think it's time that we address something. For all the work that we have done so far, mental health is being represented in games at long last, but to different effects, and ultimately, I'm still not sure that it's being looked at properly. I want to focus on mental health within video games. I'm not a qualified doctor, so I won't be able to speak for certain about many of the issues raised in the games, but I do have and live with mental illness. It's weird saying this on camera, and you'll have to bear with me if I look a little nervous, because as a male in their 30s, growing up, it was almost impossible to talk about this sort of thing. But for as long as I remember, there's always been something there that isn't quite right, or at least it isn't seen as quite right in society, and it's only just really been recently that it's been okay to not be okay. I am, in case you're watching this and wondering, signed up for therapy, and this isn't a part of that. It's just a weird overlap between the games that I've been playing lately, wanting to produce a video surrounding mental health, and how I've been feeling. Oh, and one more thing. If you enjoyed this video, please consider making a donation to my Buy Me a Coffee page. When you donate, if you pop in a comment, something to do with mental health or related to this video, that donation will count towards a donation that I'll be making towards a mental health organisation. I'll be posting on my YouTube page once the donation's been made for complete transparency. I massively appreciate anything you can spare for helping to support a great cause. So, grab a cup of coffee or a beverage of your choosing, and let's talk about mental health within video games. As the screen comes up from black, you see a young girl in her late teens, early 20s perhaps, pushing the resisting water back with a stick as she propels herself in a small handmade boat across a river. A gloomy haze covers the sky. A slight film grain catches your eye as you hear the narrator speak.
This is a journey deep into darkness. There will be no more stories after this one.
Followed by multiple other, eerily similar voices.
Why is she doing this? They're watching. Why isn't she coming? She's doing this for him. She wants to rescue him. He's already dead. I can feel you coming. Quiet.
The voices simultaneously inform you that the girl has reached her destination, or is close, while chastising her and rewarding her. It's clear that Senua is experiencing something that many of us will never truly understand: auditory hallucinations, as a part of an overarching issue that she experiences that the vast majority of us do not. As her story is explained, it is told to us that she wanted to marry a character named Dillion, but he was taken from her. She was always wired a little bit differently, the narrator tells us in roundabout ways.
Sin strikes out of nowhere, throwing you helplessly back into the maelstrom, drowning the mind in fear, deeper, deeper, dragging you down so far into the void that maybe this time there is no coming back.
But his death, it tipped her into a void, so to speak. She always had the darkness within her, the narrator explains, and she hoped that marrying Dillion would quell that darkness, but instead, his death sent her further into the realms of darkness. The darkness is Hellblade Senua's sacrificed word for psychosis, a mental illness that, according to the NHS, is a collection of symptoms that are related to people losing contact with reality. When dealing with an episode of psychosis, a person's thoughts and perceptions are disrupted, and they may have difficulty recognising what is real and what is not. Those, as much as I'd like to claim them, are not my words, but the words of the National Institute of Mental Health, and is easily the best description for what Senua experiences here. Senua's darkness continues as she vows that she will climb into the depths of hell and save her Dillion, but as she does, demons rise from the floor and appear as if from nowhere, attacking her from all angles. At first, it seems like a clever way to add combat into the game, but on reflection, it represents so much more. Senua actively trying to fight her demons, trying to get on top of her illness, but the darkness surrounds her. As you, the player, get better at fighting the darkness, it gets more difficult to defeat, marking something true within mental illness. It can often creep up on you, and when it does, it might not be defeated. It might not be easy to beat your personal darkness. It may come back stronger, more immune to any tablets that you've taken to suppress it, more difficult to deal with as more time passes. When Senua is defeated, she doesn't lose an extra life. The darkness takes over more of her body, until it reaches her head where it overtakes her entire being. At this point the game is over, and your entire save file is deleted, forcing you to restart the game again. When the darkness defeats you with mental illness, there are no reprieves. There is no coming back. This game is incredible. I'm not just saying that to try and hype up or sell your game. I genuinely wish I played it sooner. It delves so deep with cleverly laced, subtle metaphors, and at the same time is completely straight down the line about Senua and her issues. She is tasked with killing 4 giants, gatekeepers to Hell, in order to open the door to the River Styx, where she can then ride to Helheim. This is a relatively classic story told within Norse mythology, but the giants all represent something also, something that you'll get informed of as you go through their respective areas. You start with a choice. A giant that represents illusion, the idea of seeing something that is not there, just like with her psychosis. Or a giant that represents fire. The events of this particular area are really harrowing, hard to get through as you realise that the village Senua lived in, and likely the cause of Dillion's death, had been torched. You see, through her psychosis, the remains of the village as she runs, most of the time away from the fire, trying to escape it until there is no escape anymore. Prior to the fight with the giant, a new stance is taken. She runs into the fire against her own advice, or at least against the advice of the voices that doubted her, and heads in to face the giant, the trauma, head on. You will never recover. You will never beat the darkness if you can't face it, is what the game is telling us through thinly veiled metaphors, and is somewhat genius in that respect. This is probably the first game I've ever experienced that deals with mental health in this way. Usually we see almost movie-esque depictions of mental health. Psychosis, it would be treated more like a character being psychotic and a Joker-esque villain rather than someone that we actively want to help through their issues. I remember playing Far Cry 3 for the first time. The main antagonist, Vaas, was clearly insane. He was borderline psychotic, flipping between rational and able to reason well, especially in any scenes that he shares with the primary antagonist, Hoyt, and just being insane. I just want to clarify something here. I'm aware that I just painted Vaas as the main antagonist and Hoyt as the primary antagonist, and I'm aware that these are the same thing. At least on paper. You see, there is actually a distinction in Far Cry 3. Hoyt may well be the final boss, but for 3/4 of the game, you spend your time fighting Vaas, and Hoyt only really appears in the final quarter of the game. The absolute star of the show here is Vaas. He acts like a deranged lunatic, and was designed by the lead writer of Far Cry 3, Jeffrey Yoelem, to be a reflection of what people believe about video games. That they're bad for gamers' mental health. That players could end up being somewhat like Vaas if they get caught up in their most indulgent, violent impulses. We find out via his sister that Vaas was brought to the islands by Hoyt.
He left me, the tribe, his birthright. Hoyt Volker lured him away with money, drugs. He became a monster, but he was still my brother.
He became addicted to drugs and kept under the control of Hoyt, growing cannabis for him and selling people into slavery. When we finally, towards the end of the game, get to kill Vaas, something interesting happens. Jason, the main protagonist, on multiple occasions has taken drugs from strange locals.
We spend our whole lives holding back. Imagine how quickly you can succeed if you just take what you want.
And seems to have an episode of psychosis after being stabbed in the chest by Vaas. He enters this dream state where he stabs Vaas multiple times until Vaas drops to the floor. The two of them collapse together. Vaas looks at Jason, and when Jason wakes up, he is the only one to do so. When Jason approaches Vaas' sister Citra, in Jason's last dream sequence or drug-fueled psychosis, which is personally what this reads more as to me at least, Jason hears a voice that sounds like Vaas, saying that he will make Jason a warrior.
He's gonna make a warrior out of you.
I think Far Cry 3 was the first real experience that I had of mental illness being depicted within a video game. It really set the game apart from almost anything else I'd ever played before. Unfortunately, as the series have gone on, the Far Cry games now feel a little by the numbers. But I think that's because Far Cry 3 is trying to deal with not one character, but two with psychotic tendencies. It can be really easy just to look at Vaas and see that he's a straight up psychopath, hell-bent on hunting Jason down as sport. But actually Jason is the one that's undergoing the biggest mental change in the game. After landing on the island and being taken prisoner, Grant, Jason's brother, is killed by Vaas. Similar to Senua, we're looking at trauma or grief being the fueling point for psychosis for Jason. I'll be honest though, my first thought on the Jason Vaas dynamic wasn't what the game really wanted to tell us. Until his death was confirmed by Hoyt, I semi-expected to have a major twist pulled on us by the storytellers of the game. I half expected to hear that Vaas was never real, that Jason was Vaas, that he had been on this island so long and had taken so many drugs that he had invented Vaas. Similar to how Vaas had chased Jason for sport throughout the game, the twist of this would have been that Jason had in fact invented Vaas for sport. I remember distinctly what led me to thinking this, and I love this moment almost more than any other moment in video gaming history, because from it I learned what would become my favourite quotes. If you've ever played Far Cry 3, you'll know the scene that I'm talking about. I wouldn't usually play a whole solid minute-and-a-half video clip, but this is genuinely brilliant and worth playing in whole.
But the definition of insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change. That is crazy. But the first time somebody told me that, I don't know, I thought they were bullshitting me, so boom, I shot him. The thing is, okay, he was right. And then I started seeing it everywhere I looked, all these fucking pricks. Everywhere I looked, doing the exact same fucking thing. Over and over and over and over and over again. Thinking, this time, it's gonna be different. No, please. This time, it's gonna be different. I'm sorry. I don't like the way you are looking at me. Okay? You have a fucking problem in your head. Do you think I'm bullshitting you? Do you think I'm lying? Fuck you! Okay? Fuck you! It's okay, man. I'm gonna chill here, man. I'm gonna chill. The thing is, alright? The thing is I killed you once already. And it's not like I am fucking crazy. It's okay. It's like water under the bridge. Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
I remember thinking at this point that Vaas wasn't who he claimed to be, and was a figment of Jason's imagination, who was then killed off by Jason, but in his mind rather than physically. While it's an old trope in media that the main character was insane or dreaming all along, in this instance it really could have worked. Vaas though is shown a bit like one of those main media insane bad guys.
How about a magic trick?
He's intelligent but menacing. He is the Joker in this situation, a flashpoint of insanity that people remember for being psychotic, but in reality you can tell that Vaas is a Hollywood portrayal, or at least a video game equivalent of an insane person. Crazy laughs, the thrill of the ride, the desire to hunt and maim, the fact that he's an antagonist. While Vaas is extremely fun as a character, he is a character. He's not a Senua. Senua is a completely different portrayal of every trope that we've ever grown to know. She's authentic, scared by the voices in her head, yet she's grown accustomed to them. The voices talk to her, and some doubt her, some confirm her choices, some talk little sense whatsoever. Her visions, the darkness, it's all too real, and not often. It's fleeting, like an episode. These portrayals though are mere signs of the times. Far Cry 3 was released in 2012 when it wasn't quite as easy to talk about mental health or illness without becoming either a statistic or a caricature. Hellblade is an evolution of that, moving us further forward, as now we can start to empathise with people who suffer, and we don't need to make them into a comic book villain. This next section may be a little difficult to hear. There will be some very hard-hitting facts, but I think they're worth divulging for the sake of this video. Of course though, what we're exploring here are what I would deem as major mental illnesses. Psychosis can have a major effect on someone's life. Seeing things and hearing things that aren't there to the point that you believe that it is a reality is a truly terrifying thought. I couldn't imagine living with this, and I'm thankful that I don't have to, But not all mental illnesses are made equally. Some can be just as debilitating but affect us in completely different ways, such as depression or anxiety. Depression affects 5% of adults, 3% of children under the age of 16, and 1% of children under the age of that, according to the World Health Organization. On paper that doesn't sound like a lot, but you need to bear in mind that there are over 8 billion people on this planet, and suddenly the numbers start to feel very scary. Over 400 million people on this planet are living with depression. Of those numbers, more than 700,000 of them suffer so badly that they're no longer here. In the age brackets of 15 to 29, self-immolation is the leading cause of death. That is a horrible, sobering thought, and one that I've dealt with most of my days on this planet, not becoming another statistic. I am one of those 400 million people. And when you put it in a bubble, I guess it is quite nice to know that I'm not on my own with this. However, the issue is that you never know who is or who isn't suffering with depression. Depression isn't a one-size-fits-all illness. You can't tell from initial looks, and in fact, someone close to you may well be suffering and you might not ever know. After all, the common consensus is that you just have to put a smile over it and move on. As a male, well, at least the last time I checked I was, it's only really been the last few years where the awareness for depression within males has raised. I remember a time where even if you just felt a little sad, you would be bullied or picked on for not being manly enough. It's okay to not be okay. At least that's what the slogan says, right? But it's not okay. It's never really been okay. So how do games deal with this? How do they deal with this impossibly large, unfathomable silent killer of an illness that eats away at every thought that you have every day? The truth is, not many have, but there are a few, and that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to start with one of my personal favourites. Limbo is about a small child who needs to journey across a dangerous world in search of someone that he loves. The game explores grief at having lost everyone around you and feelings of loneliness as you have no ways to communicate, no voice to talk with or talk to, and no one to help you. It literally explores how it feels to lose those you love. The game is a giant metaphor for the idea of falling into a black hole of depression with no way of getting out. You have limited tools. The ability to run, jump and grab, and that's literally it. You have no weapons, no means to defend yourself even against big enemies. You are on your own in this hell, and it's your job to find your way back to the light. Subtlety isn't Limbo's forte, and it's quite clear that the game was designed to symbolise depression and grief. But I think at least that we need to move without subtlety, especially when we're dealing with issues that affect such a large number of us. Though Limbo is still less on the nose with its analysis of depression than, say, Actual Sunlight. Actual Sunlight is more of a visual novel than it is a full video game, but it tells the story of a young male, Evan Winters, who has pretty much given up on life. He is tired of the 9-to-5 grind. He finds others' success something to be bitter about, and believes society to be unfair. He is hypercritical, and comes across as a horrible person, cynical and nihilistic, but his worldview is skewed by a demon that lords over him, his own depression. The whole game centres around this one character, and he is, well, to say he's in a bad state would be an understatement. At the start of the story, he is relatively well liked and respected in his job. He just doesn't see that. He sees a group of people that are on his level. Apart from Tori, a girl who he works with, who he's put on a pedestal. He goes to work every single day and sees no point in what he's doing. He's just living life, plodding through it one day at a time, and is bored of that life. There's this interesting bit though, a breaking of the fourth wall where the writer of the game, Will O'Neill, leaves a note to the player. It serves to break up the doom and gloom that the game imparts from minute one, and is a reminder to the player that while this is a game, it is deeply entrenched in reality. Many of us feel like Evan does in this game. A lot of us see life as a badly written routine, one that is rinse and repeat until the inevitable end. But it doesn't have to be that way. It can be that from the very beginning you can choose your outlook on life. This is almost a message back to a younger Will O'Neill, asking himself to make better choices. Don't rely on comfort foods when you feel bad. Stay in shape. Don't choose to work for the wage, work for the enjoyment of the job. Don't choose to sit and play video games all day long. Get outside with some friends and enjoy the world while you're still young. But Will categorises himself a late 20s to early 30s male as old. Too old to change. Things, according to O'Neill, are only going to get more difficult with time. He's already starting to see that, as well as the impact of his choices in his early 20s. He then goes on to explain that this game is a portrait of a person in that condition. In his 30s, near 40s, with no options, no pride in his job, no one to love, nothing to cherish. This is a portrait. But it's a portrait based on Will's own thoughts and feelings towards that ever-creeping hangman that is age itself. Ultimately, Evan's life is self-destructing, with the end sequence of the game showing him seemingly ending his own life. But this is left somewhat open by the developers. But it's these moments before he steps onto the roof that are perhaps the scariest part of this portrayal of depression. After giving up drinking, after smashing up his apartment, and having been rejected by a girl who he has feelings for, only for the news to spread around his office, and her opinion of him changed considerably, which ultimately leads to him quitting his job because his new boss was an asshole, Evan faces his own self-fulfilling prophecy. See, he makes up these scenarios in his head. He talks to himself, or at least he has these conversations in his mind. He makes up a scenario where he's a teacher. He makes up a scenario where he's on a talk show being celebrated for being a writer and a comedian. And he makes up a scenario where he's a patient with a doctor questioning him. These maladaptive daydreams almost keep Evan grounded, but even these start to twist and warp as he gets further through his life. This sequence here, where Evan's conversation with his doctor, or at least his doctor within his head, sees his doctor confirming everything that he ever said. He's pathetic. No one wants him, he is a failure. He has nothing left to live for, and that he should climb onto the roof of his apartment building and jump off. After this moment, Evan gets tunnel vision. He can only see in one direction, and everything points him towards that being the answer. He tries to take a shower. He's told to go to the roof. He tries to open the fridge. He's told to go to the roof. He leaves to go to the roof, and he's asked whether he really wants to go to the roof. And there's two answers, yes and yes. He gets to the elevator and it gives him 3 floors to travel between. All of them say roof. This really got me. I didn't expect this, but this tunnel vision is something that people with depression really do live with, especially when it gets to the stage where they're contemplating not waking up the following day. This is real. It's difficult and it's hard hitting, but it's real. Evan, in actual sunlight, experiences something everyone with depression or anxiety suffers with, a feeling of perceived hopelessness. Hopelessness is a horrible, horrible feeling. A feeling like you can't change anything. You can't even begin to change anything, like you're on an island, deserted, cast away from anyone or anything, without any ability to save yourself. Of course, those not on that island would ask, why don't you just build a raft to sail away? But it's not that simple. You just can't even comprehend, when you feel like all hope has left you, how to go about doing that simple task. You overthink it all. Where would the rope come from? How do I cut the logs? What happens if I mess up? What happens if a wave knocks me off the raft? What happens if it capsizes? What happens? What happens becomes the constant threat. What happens becomes something insurmountable. What happens keeps you from taking action. This is, of course, a form of chaos theory. The idea that everything can spiral out of control by you taking one singular action. If you make the most simple of movements, it can cause your death, or the death of someone that you cherish. This is a hard reality. A hard thing to understand if you don't suffer with anxieties or depression, and it's even harder to explain if you're someone who does suffer. But this game, try as it might, sends a message that may well be real and harsh, but it's not entirely true. The game almost explicitly states that if you're below 25, you have a chance of changing your life. But as you get towards 40, it's game over, and you may as well accept your fate. According to the game, if you still have good looks by the age of 30, then there's still a chance. I never really had those, I'm not going to lie. And I'm in a similar sort of shape to Evan within this game. But I don't see my life as over because I struggle internally and I'm out of shape. I know that I need to seek help, that I can't mentally move on until I've actively learnt the tools to help me help myself. I know that once I work on my own headspace, I will feel a bit better and a bit happier to move on to a more physical space, which I can then improve also. Improvement can happen at any age, to anyone, anywhere. It all starts up here. These games so far are all very different examples of mental illness being represented differently within games. These feelings, they don't just appear overnight and are not thrust upon us from the moment that we're born. That's why it's so refreshing to find a game that handles a character developing a mental illness. That game is Chicory, A Colourful Tale. This game is presented like a children's colouring book. The world has been sapped of its colours and you and a magical paintbrush need to save the land before black trees take over the world. It sounds a lot like Epic Mickey, but this game is anything but a Disney adventure. You play as a character named after your favourite food. And not knowing what to actually put here, and because crispy fried beef chili with egg fried rice is a bit too long for the box, I settled for biscuits. When the main character was revealed to be a cute hand-drawn dog, I was not disappointed. You are a janitor inside of the Wielder's Tower charged with clearing up after Chicory, a rabbit who holds the brush. But you find yourself in possession of the brush and before too long the mind games really begin. You get mistaken as the new wielder as you hold the brush. Fight an odd eye creature in the shadows with some of the coolest music I've ever heard inside of an indie game. And then take the brush back to Chicory, who is in a bad way. She tells you to take the brush and leave her alone before you head out to face the sources of the corruption in the land. The thing is, the corruption is born from Chicory's anxieties, depression and anger towards the world. She doubts everyone, herself, you and her mentor Blackberry. All of these manifest as boss fights in the game, all with this really cool aesthetic. The interesting thing with this game though is that both Biscuits and Chicory develop similar problems. To the point where Biscuits must face herself in a fight with her inner thoughts telling her that she'll never be good enough to hold the brush. Biscuits, through the game, questions herself. She wonders if she'll actually ever be good enough. She wants to be as good as Chicory was as the wielder, but doesn't think that she can ever live up to that. Biscuits, as the game goes on, develops these thoughts of imposter syndrome. A feeling that you will never be good enough even if you're doing and achieving everything that you've said that you won't be able to. She lives out the adventures of the wielder, and is good enough and more. But she can never see that. This is then amplified by Chicory's anger towards the world. When Biscuits faces Chicory's inner thoughts, her inner demons so to speak. This version of Chicory tells her that she was never supposed to hold the brush, that it was all circumstance, right time, right place, wrong person. This sends poor Biscuits into a tailspin. She still tries to defeat the evil to save her home and fill the world with colour again, but now she believes that she just isn't good enough. It's actually a really heartbreaking and real story. On one hand, you've got someone with heavy depression, someone who already knows that they are living with mental illness. Chicory addresses the fact that the corruption is coming from her quite early in the game. She knows that this is her mind creating the problems not just for her, but everyone that she loves. Depression isn't just something that affects one person, the game teaches us, but sucks in everyone around you. There's these clever sections where the darkness, the black is encroaching on the screen, and it seems to be coming for everyone, not just Chicory. But her illness has made her too self-obsessed to see it. This game, in some ways, actually helped me see it. I've been down this path myself, and while I see it in hindsight now, I see that I did damage to people around me. This game points out how wide that damage can be if you don't do something about it. On the other hand, you have Biscuits. Biscuits was a happy-go-lucky janitor with an idol that she looks up to. Through the game though, she develops feelings of self-doubt which become feelings of worthlessness. This shows us something more than illness being skin deep. There are layers to this. Feelings evolve and change, and they often get worse over time. Self-depreciation eventually leads to a self-hatred, which then leads to feelings of worthlessness. It's a horrendous pathway that happens over time. While it's sped up for the narrative in Chicory: A Colourful Tale, we can see the feelings change over time. This game was not what I expected. Sure, it was on the nose sometimes, with Chicory literally proclaiming that she's depressed, but the subtleties that lie in the walls closing in around you, the characters being swallowed by this darkness, and Biscuit's slow descent into her own downward spiral were a better representation of mental health than I ever could have thought possible from a game that looks like a kid's colouring book. It teaches us things about ourselves and about mental illness, and that's what these games should be. For all the love in the world that I have for Vaas in Far Cry 3, his mental illness is almost portrayed like a movie villain, like I said earlier, almost like the Joker. There is illness there, but we learn nothing about what ails him, just that he's a bit nuts. This representation, the movie villain archetype, is what developers need to get away from. The direction these games is going in is the right way. It's not perfect yet, but games like Chicory honestly make me feel like mental health and illness are something that people could potentially learn about through video games. And I think that needs to be the direction going forward. Chicory and Hellblade tell two very different stories about mental health, both of which stick with you as the player. Senwa's struggle against her own darkness is captivating, and when I booted up the second installment of the game, a part of me wondered why. The story had been told. She'd overcome her madness. In fact, she started to use it as fuel, which is directly told to us within the first half an hour of play. When the voice of her father comes back, berating her, telling her that the darkness will always come back for her, reminding her that even when you think therapy has taken hold, your demons can often find a way back in, she snaps back.
I carry it with me.
To hold on to it.
It drives me forward.
She cannot forget.
It's a promise. Not a prison.
Senwa's resolve here is incredible. She's been to hell and back. Literally. And now she washes up on the shore, alone with nothing but Northmen and slavers, and still she refuses to bow to her own darkness. The representation of her mental health at the start of Hellblade 2 is now something that she's learnt to live with. She's learnt to embrace the dark, despite the thoughts still doing their best to intrude upon her. What I found most interesting about Hellblade 2 though, was the Northman that you find right at the start of the game. Senwa takes him captive after he tries to kill her, and creeping up his arm is the same darkness that Senwa has. He is, incidentally, the first person in the two games that we directly meet with that Senwa doesn't end up skewering. And he also carries his own darkness, his own sickness, and his own inner demons. Games have often derived the mentally ill as villains or as main heroes. These thoughts, intrusions, they collude against one character, and yet here, we're seeing that multiple people have the darkness. It's not just you that has this illness. You're not alone. Chicory shows us this too. Every townsperson in this game is odd. They all have their own problems, but the problems are all deeper rooted than the games first let on. This is something that's done brilliantly within these two games, but playing them feels really heavy. Psychonauts, however, says you can have it both ways. You can have a bit of fun and explore mental health. Literally. You play as Rasputin, who wants to become a psychonaut because his parents told him that he wouldn't be able to. A psychonaut is someone who invades other people's brains, defeating the censors who are out to stamp out anyone who doesn't belong in the mind that you're intruding upon. The game is pretty on the nose about what it's talking about. You head into people's minds. In this though, and forgive me if I'm wrong, you never actually seem to solve the people's illness. Your job is almost just to understand their plights by alleviating them of their mental baggage, absorbing their negative thoughts, and clearing up any mental blockages by dusting up what I'm calling mind webs. Each character has a different illness or quirk. Each one has a different series of memories that you can unlock, and some of the stories that these characters have are genuinely tragic. But it makes no bones about the fact that you are delving into people's minds. And sometimes it works, but sometimes the humour just falls flat. Mainly because it doesn't suit the subject matter of the game. It's like the tone and the subject matter are diametrically opposed. But in a weird way, it doesn't make the game bad, it just wasn't my cup of tea. Ugh. But I can see why it's an important game to talk about when we're talking about how we need to improve on mental illnesses representation in video games. Games like Hellblade, like Chicory, they actually try to teach us about depression, anxiety, imposter syndrome, and psychosis. Psychonauts makes a joke of the illnesses, but not in a distasteful way. It's still trying to show us that despite these setbacks, despite these issues, you can either let the illness swallow you, or you can put your mind to it and become anything you want. Even a super spy that invades other people's minds. It's a great metaphoric message at least. And you can't complain with the fact that Double Fine Productions try to at least send a positive message and actually try to broach the subject. If more developers took a chance on the idea, like pushing the idea of overcoming mental obstacles, like beating demons that are in your head, then I think the world would genuinely be a better place for it. More AAA developers need to take this on, and not glorify or bastardize illness as a means of getting sales. There was this study done in 2022 by psychologists from within the Chechnya University. They took a look at games released between 2002 and 2020 and selected the top 20 games from each year by sales volume. They then took out the games that have been top sellers for multiple years, ports and remasters, and were left with a sample size of 456 games in total. Of these games, 54, so about 12% of the games depicted mental illness in any way whatsoever. Of these 54, 43 of the games portrayed mental illness as a bad thing. Often a villain would show signs of them, or NPCs with mental health problems would find it a burden on them. 13 of them had no effect on the character whatsoever, and are often lines put in to flesh out a character with no real recourse. So for instance in Mass Effect 3, Ayan is being treated for PTSD, but this has no effect on the game.
Could I have a gun? I'd feel a lot better.
And only one game, one out of over 450 games, had a positive outlook on mental illness. That one game, shockingly, was Watch Dogs 2. Watch Dogs 2 doesn't deal with depression or anxiety or psychosis. It deals with something a little closer to home for all of us: autism. It's said that we're all on the spectrum somewhere, but Josh, one of the main characters in the game, has Asperger's, and it is acknowledged openly within the game.
Little Mr. Spectrum here.
But it's seen as a reason why he is so analytical and able to hack into systems as well as he does. The only issue here is that you have a lot of different other hackers within the group who are on a similar level to him, and none of them are diagnosed with or discussed in the same breath as autism. The amount of games released in these 18 years, with either a negative view or no view on mental health and illness, is alarming. You would think that it would be better considering that we were all stuck in our homes and mental health became a massive thing for the whole of 18 months.
From tonight, you can only leave your home for very specific reasons.
That more games would actually have been made to help shed light on what people go through in their day-to-day lives. And the truth of that situation is no. Don't get me wrong, there have been a few. Just not enough. That ever-trusty source of information, Wikipedia, told me that there have just been 84 games ever that have dealt directly with mental health. Of those 84, 5 were released after 2020, meaning that since we all came out of our homes, the focus has shifted away from mental health again. Don't get me wrong, I understand not every game can deal with mental health, it would be way too much. But given that the industry is larger than film and music put together, I genuinely think that if we really wanted to raise awareness, climbing a mountain and getting incredibly frustrated as every screen looks to test your mental capability and reflexes. At first it seems like Madeline, the main character, just wants to climb a mountain, but as she begins her climb she encounters a mirror which smashes and reveals a darker version of herself. This version tells her actively to give up. It's insistent that she won't make it, but still she carries on, defiant of her own lack of self-belief and self-worth. There's this scene, as we get into a cable car and she starts to panic because of the height. She goes into such a state of panic that Theo, her friend that she meets while climbing Mount Celeste, recognises the start of a spiral and uses recognised techniques to end her state of panic. He tells her to imagine a white feather is floating in front of her, and only her breaths, in and out, can control that feather and stop it from falling. While the game shows the walls closing in around Madeline, with these thorns around the outside of the picture, similar to how it works in Chicory when Biscuits is having a crisis, the thorns start to disappear, as does everything, including the backing track, as Madeline focuses solely on the white feather. In Hellblade 2, we've seen how everyone has their own darkness, but as a team we can overcome our issues. This is best seen here in the Strange Forest. Everyone gets separated in this section of the game, lost to wander their own thoughts as mist descends around them, trapping them and keeping them forever lost. Through Senua and her newly founded team, we learn that we can battle these illnesses, but a problem shared is a problem halved. Chicory shows us the effect mental illness can have on not just someone that's going through issues, but everyone around them. Celeste ties these together. It shows us that we can overcome our mental illness, but in order to do so, we may have to rely on others, even if it does impact them. These games all show us that help is needed for us to overcome our demons. They deliberately tell us not to go it alone, because it's a darker path, a harder path, that may well consume you if you try. There is one though. One game that shows us what happens if we don't overcome our demons and we don't get the help that we need. This game, developed by Omocat, is called Omori, and I promise you it's not as sweet and as innocent as it looks. It's actually probably one of the most gut-wrenching games I've ever played. You play as Sonny, a teenager who stays in his room 24/7. He does try to leave, but even the thought of walking down the stairs is just too much for him. What should have been an easy task is the impossible. It's never ending. It's daunting with monsters on all sides. Instead, he sleeps his days away and puts himself into his own headspace. Literally, the world is called Headspace. In this world, he is Omori. His friends love him. He's depended on to be the hero of the group. His sister looks out for him. He is outgoing and strong. He is, of course, creating a fiction within his own reality. His reality is that Sonny, incredibly ironically named, hasn't seen the light of day in 4 years. He's not managed to leave the house. He's been too afraid. At first, this game looks like the poster child for agoraphobia, and overcoming an inability to leave locations that are familiar to the person living with this mental condition. However, it's not that simple. He puts himself into a trance-like state prior to his outings in Headspace, a blank slate which he has lived within in his mind for the last 4 years. Nothing happens in the space apart from his sister's cat visiting him. He stares blankly at a PC screen, he stares at a light bulb. Nothing really happens here. This is his escape, where he needs to be to feel a balance in his head. Though, this space, nor Headspace, a place that he's made up, where he has all of his friends surrounding him at all times, are still not safe. While the characters roam around the world, monsters attack, and it's not too long before he finds himself back in the white space. This next bit startled me. See, when I got transported back to this white room, I interacted with everything. I tried to make everything work, and I couldn't get out of it. And then I remembered that I had unlocked a new skill, Stab. So I went to my skills and found, sure enough, it was there, and I did not expect that. That is your way out of the white space. The acceptance almost that this place, this reality, isn't real. And that your character dislikes himself so badly that to get out of his own purgatory set in his mind, he has used his own stab ability on himself. This game does not play around. It does not want the meanings to be misconstrued. This game, as it says in the warnings at the start of the game, will be unsettling. It'll deal with graphic natured issues. It will be hard to play. The thing is, you can bet that this goes the same way as every other video game that depicts mental health, right? You have to overcome it. You can beat it. You can. There is a way to beat the sickness that plagues Sonny. You can beat Omori, but it won't be easy, and one wrong choice along the way can leave you with regrets. See, there are 5 endings to Omori, and 3 of the endings are considered bad, and you can end the game before it even really gets to begin. I did not expect that. So, the first time that you get into the real world of Sonny, you have this option to open a knocking door or walk away. If you open it, you're greeted by Kel, a friend of yours from 4 years ago, who has seen you moving away and just wants to spend a couple of days with his good friend. You should answer the door, as any good, competent video game player will agree. Or you can choose not to. If you choose not to, then Kel leaves and you spend the next few days tackling chores that your mum's left for you, before either moving away without resolving anything, and Omori following on too. That's a bad ending for sure, as it leaves nothing resolved, but it is nowhere near the worst. See, throughout the game, in the headspace you're looking for your friend Basil. He's a timid kid who just wants to nurture things. He's with you to begin with, and then he goes missing. However, in the real world, Basil is far from missing. At the age of 16, he's still being bullied, now by a former friend of yours, Aubrey. She's changed since being a 12-year-old. She's acting out and dealing with things in her own way, and it's been noticed by everyone around her. She's seen now as horrible to be around. And it all stemmed from a photo album that Basil kept, as he took photos of the group as kids. The real issue for Aubrey is that there are pictures of Sonny's sister, Marie, in the album, and Marie died 4 years ago. It doesn't take much to add up the dots and put it all together. Aubrey's change and Sonny's reclusiveness, the trauma of Marie's demise, it caused these children to develop huge coping mechanisms. It was hard to play as these children and not feel some form of compassion for them. They're just kids, undergoing a major life trauma, one that takes more than time to heal from. There may be no coming back for them, they just have to learn how to cope. But Sonny's demons keep wanting to show him things. He keeps needing to confront things within the white space and headspace. He sees a recital and an argument between him and Marie, where he shoves her, and she falls down a set of stairs. Sonny didn't just lose his sister, he accidentally killed her, and Basil helped hide the truth by making it seem like she did this to herself. You then have a choice to make. You can confront Basil, who is consumed by his own self-hatred and guilt, or go to bed. If you confront him, he gets angry because you left for 4 years for him to deal with it on his own, and stabs you in the eye. You both fall unconscious, where the only thing left to do is fight your inner demons. Only, you can't win this fight. It overwhelms and kills you, and then you can choose to continue or not continue. If you continue, you confess everything and Omori disappears. That's our nice ending. Alternatively, you can choose not to fight on and Omori takes over before Sonny is seen throwing himself from a balcony. That, by the way, is still not the worst ending, but Sonny tried to beat his demons here and failed. You can also opt to never confront Basil to begin with. At least you'll keep your eye, right? Well, no. Because in this scenario, the last thing keeping Basil alive, his grandmother passes away, and he makes a decision. It's not one that's easy to stomach, as if you picked up a knife on the night before this final sleep, you will wake up and have just one option: stab. Only, this doesn't happen within Headspace. It happens within reality. In this scenario, the group loses 2 teenagers in one night. To put it bluntly, Omori deals with so many things that need to be addressed. I was kind of blown away. Teenage depression is a very real thing. We write off depression as something kids can't have because their biggest worry should be about what games they're going to play when they get home from school. But in reality, what Omori does very cleverly is tells us that we need to be looking out for our children more. Just like other games in this video have hopefully shown us that we need to look after ourselves more, and mental illness isn't just something that lurks in the shadows, or isn't a crazy guy spouting nonsense at you while laughing manically. Which is why I'm so alarmed by the fact that not only did the study that I mentioned earlier not have many games that depict mental well-being, but it also classified them wrong. See, the study shows a multiple of games that, let's face facts, were classified into whether mental health was depicted positively, negatively, or neutrally. But the depiction of mental illness will almost by nature always be negative, and rather than looking at isolated incidences within the game, they should have looked at the messages spread within the game. Back to Hellblade, this game, yes, it depicted psychosis as terrible, an awful condition, and it should, because it is. Senua never beats psychosis. She never gets over it. She instead learns to accept it and uses it for her own betterment. Not only though does she take it and enrich herself, she takes her darkness, her story of overcoming it and living with the voices, and transforms other people's lives too. Hellblade 1 may well be a negative, grungy look at what it's like to live with trauma, guilt, survivor's guilt, and psychosis. But Hellblade 2 focuses on how those negative aspects can be put to better use, for the betterment of everyone around. If Senua's sacrifice shows us that to overcome your own demons you need to accept help, Hellblade 2 shows us that we can take that help and use it to help others. And I understand that Senua's saga was released after this study was completed, but by the end of Senua's sacrifice, I still could only see that Senua had overcome and learned to live with psychosis. And that, as a message at the end of the day, can't be a bad thing. The meaning in this study is all wrong. It depicts games as a wholly negative space when it comes to mental illness. But how can a story about a dog and a bunny who overcome depression and imposter syndrome really be a bad portrayal? Is the illness deemed as a bad thing? Well, of course it is, but when was flu ever considered good? Mental illnesses are sicknesses that you can't see. They're not good things, but these games should be showing us, like in Chicory, that with the right help you can overcome it. It might take time. It might be hard, but you can do it. Believe in yourself, and most importantly, let others believe in you too. These games leave us with a positive message, and that is what needs to be looked at in greater detail. The illness itself is always going to be negative, but the long-lasting effect is that these people that have been suffering with mental illness are trying to become better people. And that's what we should be focusing on. If we're just killing off every character that has a mental disorder because they seem a bit crazy, while it may be good fun, it's sending the wrong message about mental health. Rather, I'd like to see more games like Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, and even more like Chicory. Chicory, for what it was, left a profound effect upon me. It may look like a game for kids, but the message is so much deeper. Yeah, okay, it may be a little bit direct with its message about depression, with Chicory literally yelling the words, "I am depressed," but the way her mental illness affects everyone, and how Biscuits develops her own problems that are almost on a par with her friend, is somewhat profound. Ultimately, if you live with mental illness, video games can be the very best and the very worst of therapies for you. They can offer escape or suck the players into a vortex of solitude. And either, when trying to get away from the world is okay, But for me, I found the better therapy for myself was to throw myself into these games that leave you with a heavy heart, but genuinely help you experience what life can be like in the world of a video game character in need of emotional support. Of course, don't go using these games as a crutch. If you're really struggling, reach out for help. After all, without you, these games about these subjects are pointless. Your health, your mental well-being should be the biggest takeaway from this video. As ever, thank you for watching. If you want to see more videos tackling heavy subjects and the true psychology of games, please consider subscribing to the channel. Before you do that though, why not check out the video above right now, which is a little bit more lighthearted and is a look at side quest design within video games, the psychology of what makes them work and what doesn't make them work. I tell you what, I'll even give you a sneak preview. The game launched on the NES, and in theory offers the first proper instance of open-worldedness gaming has ever seen. Actually, no, not true. Oh, for God's sake, me. Of course you come in and be a smart ass and tell me that Perseus and Hydralide was the first open world game. But I don't know nearly enough about that, so let's just move on to Zelda, where I can talk about effectively how each frame is effectively a new frame in a big open world. We're told very little about where to go. The game just expects us to know what to do and how to do it. And actually this ends up being a problem.